Hi, Gila.
Hi, Rena.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. What's
Here we
what's up?
are.
What are we talking about today?
Today, I really wanted to talk about, okay, this sounds boring, but it's not. Coping with your emotions without using food. But when we say coping with our emotions, how do we do that? And some really practical tips that I've used and Rena's used and how to actually implement them. What do you think?
I think it's a great idea. Can I start with a funny story?
Please. That's always fun.
So I'm part of a networking group for my business,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the women who was in the group was saying to me, "What? So you're going to tell me that I can't eat chocolate?" I was like, "No, of course not. Of course you can eat chocolate. I eat chocolate frequently. I like chocolate a lot." She's okay, but like, what if I don't like care that I eat emotionally? So I was like, okay, so keep eating emotionally. She's like, so but then like what, like who do you work with? What's the point? So she happens to be like a marriage coach.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to her, I was like, well, if a woman, like a man and a wife are fighting and they don't care that they're fighting, they're not going to come work with you either, right?
Right. That's a great
So
point.
like if you're happy eating emotionally, then
Right.
go ahead, continue eating emotionally. But
Right.
ultimately, I think the point is that people who are bothered by eating emotionally are people who realize that there's something else that they can be doing with themselves, with their time, as a way to cope with it, and are not managing to do that.
100%. That's a really good point. That's really funny that you said that because, like, I mean, and I know, like, most of the clients that like call us are like, I can't stop eating emotionally. What do I
Right,
do? Right? That's like
right.
the number one thing I hear.
Yeah. So I was just telling her, I was like, okay, so the point of my work with my clients is not to say don't ever eat emotionally ever again. It's eat emotionally sometimes, but let's give
Mm.
you a toolbox of things that you can now take with you and use that like most of the time. And so you default to eating emotionally sometimes, but here's your
Right.
toolbox at least. So we're going to talk about how to fill your toolbox.
Right.
Right?
Before we talk about that though, could
Yeah.
you just like explain like in like very short, like why is it so many people's default to use food as a coping mechanism, just so people like have a good understanding of the whole picture?
I think it's readily available,
Right.
and it's compared to other possibilities of ways of people coping with food, it's a lot more of a socially acceptable way of coping, as opposed to like
Mhm.
drugs or
Mhm.
even drinking,
Mhm.
way
Yep.
less acceptable. And it also doesn't tend to impair like somebody's day-to-day functioning in general, meaning somebody who's drunk, they're not going to be able to show up to work. But
Right.
if you binge in the morning, okay, so you have a huge stomach ache, but
Right.
you can still basically function.
Right.
Um,
And yeah, I agree.
what were you going to say? You were going to add something?
I just was gonna say that diet culture compounds it. Like the more
Yes,
that we diet,
totally. I think that seals the deal right there.
yeah.
Because if it wasn't for diet culture, then we would just eat emotionally sometimes and just not care.
Right. Yeah.
But because diet culture has told us this is bad, so then we do it even more because it's bad. So therefore, I can't get away from it. I can't stop it. Can't stop myself. So I'm just gonna keep doing more.
Right. Like the shame and the guilt and the hiding,
Mm-hmm.
like just perpetuates it.
Yeah, and the restriction is what creates the binging.
Right.
And the
Right.
opposite, with
Exactly.
the unconditional permission, is what creates the unconditional permission to eat is what creates unconditional permission to stop.
Right. Exactly. So let's talk about the other coping mechanisms. So do you want to talk about your other coping mechanisms, like what you do when you're feeling like emotional, or do you want to just talk about general things?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about some things I do. Um, so the first thing, it's kind of a broad category, but actually like feeling my feelings was really, I think, the first thing that I worked on, as opposed to turning to like very specific other things, which we're going to get to, what some of those other things are. Really, my first line of defense was, hey, I'm so busy numbing my emotions with food, I don't actually
Mm-hmm.
know what it means to feel. So that was really the first thing that I felt like I needed to work on. So that's where I started. And whether a person does this with a therapist, coach, on their own, whatever it is, but really learning how to just identify, like, what am I actually feeling right now? And not being scared of that emotion, knowing that this emotion is not going to kill me, even though sometimes it feels like it's going to, but this emotion's not going to kill me, and I can just let it just ride its course through my body and know that it has an end to its lifespan. It's not going to continue. It's not going to kill me. It's going to die first. So just allowing myself to really feel into it. And that once I did that, it really opened up a whole range of other things that I was able to do. But that was really number one.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to know, like, maybe your opinion, or like if you've done any research on this, but like, why are we so quick to not let ourselves feel our emotions? Like, where does that come from, that we just try to stuff our emotions away? Like, I'm new to this, like feeling your emotions, and it's very powerful. And I really I'm curious.
I think it's because society has painted this picture of us needing to look a certain way. And part of that picture is somebody who's a high achiever, accomplishes a lot in life, doesn't let anything get in the way. And when we're so focused on do, and not allowing ourselves to show the side of ourselves that's quote unquote weak, then it becomes impossible to show that side even to ourselves. I mean, we can't, what's the phrase? We can't, how does it go? We can't mute like specific emotions. It's not exactly how it goes, but that's the idea. Like we can't like say like, oh, I'm gonna always feel happy, but I'm not gonna let myself feel sad. If we don't let ourselves feel like that excitement, we're so busy being driven and going and accomplishing and showing the world this like perfect image of ourselves, then we're not really allowing ourselves to feel anything.
So do you think it has to do with like social media, because like we're always looking at other people's lives, as opposed to like 100, 200, 500 years ago, we didn't have that perspective?
Yeah, there's actually a really great book called, I can't remember what it's called. It's by Neil Postman, I believe, and it's called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he wrote this, I think in the 70s or 80s. I have to check. But he wrote it a long time ago, before there was social media, before the internet, before smartphones and even cell phones. Mm-hmm. And he was specifically talking about amusing ourselves through television and movies, I believe, and how that is really like one of the major downfalls of humanity, because we're so busy trying to fix ourselves, like fill ourselves up, like getting the fix from whatever we're watching, that we're not actually experiencing life.
Right, and I guess that's why like now there's like a big push in the mindfulness, not just with eating, but in everything, like getting mindful, like taking breathers, seeing how you feel emotionally, where do you feel it in your body? Like there's a lot of talk about this mindfulness.
Sure. And how we're not, we're living in good times, okay, there's a lot of scary things that are happening in the world nowadays, but in general, we're living in a time of tremendous, like there's so much, there's plenty of food, there's plenty opportunities for people, there's lots of money, there's just a lot going around, and yet we're so unhappy, and it becomes like we never take the time to stop. And that's where this mindfulness piece comes in, that you're saying, like just taking breathers throughout the day. We have everything we need. Why are so many people walking around depressed and anxious? Part of it is because we're just always going and doing, and we don't take the time to slow down and stop.
Right. And I guess this is like an interesting point. Like maybe some people won't understand what I'm saying, but like I've always, like whenever I'm like feeling like sad or depressed, or like I have like an issue in my life or something really, really hard, I think about like the people in the Holocaust, and I'm like, oh, my life's so easy compared to them, until I realized like that's a really horrible thought. Like that thought just doesn't like serve me, because if in 2019 we have every single thing physically, but therefore it causes emotional distress, that is like that's a problem that Hashem gave us in 2019. That's nobody's like fault. Obviously you can't compare like having your kids and your parents ripped away from you and killed in the Holocaust to like having so much money that you feel depressed. But like I'm not comparing those two. I'm just saying like you could still feel depressed. Like, that's not your fault. Like, it really angers me and like makes me upset when I hear people being like, suck it up. Like, people went through the Holocaust. Like, how does that help you? Like, if you feel sad and depressed, like, like, why not process that? Like, why not say it's 2019 and I could go to a therapist and that's socially acceptable, and like, and then I'll feel better and live a better life. Like, you're really just giving into the victim mentality by saying like, oh, it's okay, I'll feel that. Like, I have anxiety, like, that's not the worst thing. Like, why do we do that? Like, why do you have to do that? You could feel your pain.
Yep. Totally. Hashem put us into this time. I was born into the era of the Holocaust. And so I'm not meant to just suck it up. Yes, and I'm meant to live with what I have. I'm meant to make the most of it, but this suck up mentality doesn't allow us to really live. It just puts a Band-Aid on top of everything.
It suppresses you, really.
That's a good word. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So you're saying, so somebody could take as a first step to just allow themselves to have uncomfortable feelings and know that like the feeling will eventually pass, and like you sort of have to go through it in order to, I guess, get what you need to out of it.
I think so, because I think that it's really the first line of defense, because the other things that we're going to talk about, I think, can be used as a Band-Aid unless a person is really allowing themselves to feel whatever they're feeling. Like, if they're using those other things to escape what they're feeling, then they're just substituting something for food. They're not really using it effectively. It's maladaptive.
That's really interesting. I didn't think about that, because I do use some of these tools myself, and now I'm thinking I really have to, before I go right into the tool, I have to first stop and say like, okay, what am I feeling?
Okay, fine, but we all do things that are maladaptive sometimes. We're not, like, it's impossible for us to like always be doing something that's perfectly adaptable and always feeling our feelings before we. That's kind of like neurotically crazy. I don't know how else to describe it, right? So
maybe I'm a little neurotic.
I think we all are a little neurotic. but yeah, when we can, first feel our feelings and then do these other things.
Right. And I'm not saying like I always have to do that. I'm just saying, I'm thinking right now, like, sometimes I'll try to do X, but maybe it would be helpful to try to just start this as a first step.
Yeah.
So you want to tell us other things you do, or do you want me to tell you some of the things that I do?
You tell us some things you do, and then we'll go back to me.
Okay. So I've like been hearing about meditating for a long time, and I always thought like meditating was just like sitting and thinking. I guess I just didn't have a good perception of it. I'm not sure why, but like I read Jen Sincero's book, and it was really excellent. It like opened my eyes in a lot of ways, and she's very funny, so she's like fun to listen to. I listened to her audiobook, and she mentioned probably like 20 or 30 times, like, I'm telling you, meditate 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. And I was like, maybe I should try this. So because my mind wanders to 5 million different places, that's just how I am.
That's how everybody is, Gila.
Okay, so I went onto YouTube and I typed in like 5-minute guided meditation, and like I tried all different ones, and the one that I really like is like 5-minute gratitude meditation. And like it's really not just letting your mind wander, it's actually like trying to breathe and focus on your breathing. Mm-hmm. So you're like actually trying not to think about anything except for like your breathing, and you're kind of getting in touch with your physical body. That sort of is like a way to clear your mind. Mm-hmm. And I found that like incredibly useful. And even more practical is like, it sounds like, 5 minutes, like who doesn't have 5 minutes? But like, if you don't set aside that time, you really won't get to it. So maybe if you set a 5-minute timer when you know your kids are either sleeping or at school, or your husband's not home or whatever, that you could be by yourself. Like I like to do it like 11 o'clock at night, like I'm going to sleep. It sort of like helps me fall asleep. So that's been really helpful for me.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
You want to share anything else?
So maybe you could talk about this also, but I also like found something else very useful. It's called EFT, mm-hmm. Emotional Freedom Technique, where it's called tapping. So you tap on different parts of your body, and they're pressure points. So it's sort of like the same concept as acupuncture. Mm-hmm. That like acupuncture would put a needle, I guess, where you would be like holding an emotion, but this is where you just tap on that spot. There's different ways to do it. You could also Google it, but some people like talk while they do it about that emotion. Some people don't talk, but I really do find it's also a way to connect like your brain with your body, because you're like thinking about the emotion and like living in the emotion, and you're also physically trying to get that energy out. It's
Hmm.
been very useful for me.
Yeah, I love tapping. I like journaling. I have a lot of resistance to it. It brings me back to 10th grade composition class, which
Hmm.
where I didn't do so well. But when one of the things I try to work on is journaling. But what I find is, of course, on Shabbos I can't journal, and so what I do is on Shabbos I'll either tap on whatever I'm feeling and just like go through it, and sometimes I'll read myself a guided imagery from a
That's
book,
that's great.
because I can't listen to a guided imagery.
Do you have a book
Um,
that you recommend?
um, well, there are a lot of different books. There's one in particular I use with my clients. It's called Guided Imagery for Groups. So I like that one. It has a lot of really nice imageries in it. And so I use that. And so that really helps me on Shabbos. And the other thing that also I can't do on Shabbos, but I try if I can before or after, is yoga. And I used to think that yoga was this like, I don't know, weird thing. And like,
Hmm.
I remember when I first started doing it, which was probably 6 years ago or so, I started doing yoga, maybe 7. Um, so I don't know if you do yoga, but it starts off with like a relaxation. Usually start off with like some deep breathing. And then at the end, there's this part of yoga called Shavasana, where you basically just lie down and like don't move your body.
I love
And
it.
what'd you say?
I love it. I love that.
So I used to skip over the beginning and the end because like who has time for these things?
Right.
We got
Right.
we got things we need to accomplish in life.
Right.
Um, and as I've developed into my yoga practice over the last bunch of years, I really find for me yoga is a tremendous time of self-care where sometimes I'll do more active yoga, sometimes a more passive yoga, or just like a more stretching, relaxation. But that has also really been very, very helpful for me.
That's awesome. And also it's good for listeners to hear that, like, trial and error. Like, don't like listen to this and be like, okay, I'm gonna do yoga, I'm gonna do tapping, and then like all these things can be different tools at different times of your life, and you could also adapt them to like work for you. But I was listening to a podcast, I forgot what it's called, I'll look it up after, but it's somebody who like went through she was totally fine her whole life, and then she had like an episode, like a depressive episode, like she couldn't move, like something crazy. So she does a whole podcast on like mental health, and she said that like one of her forms of treatment was yoga. And it's really true. I actually used to do yoga, even when I was pregnant with my youngest. And I'm not sure, like, like I had a little bit of trauma with the pregnancy, so I'm not sure if like I've had some sort of aversion to it, or the teacher that I had was so good and she left. So I'm like, I can't go back. But she for the last, I don't know, 10-15 minutes, she would just turn off the music. She would put lavender oil on her hands, and she would go to every single person and like massage their neck a little bit and like adjust them. And she had like this soothing, calming energy about her, and it was amazing. I loved
Yeah,
it.
that is really nice. And if I can make a recommendation, the website that I use for yoga is called Do Yoga With Me.
Hmm.
And one of the teachers on it, her name is Nikki Jones, and she's a yoga therapist, and she has a whole bunch of routines that are specifically geared to like loving yourself more or
Yeah.
helping move through grief and different emotions.
Wow.
So I definitely use those at certain points in my life, to help me through things. I found them very
Definitely
powerful,
gonna
just
try
like
it.
bawling on the yoga mat.
Right. I'm definitely gonna try that. That's a really good like thing to know, because like the yoga, it's hard for me to get to yoga at my gym just because of the time. So
Yeah,
maybe I could try it at home.
yeah.
Um, okay, do you have any other recommendations for people?
Um, I think we know like calling a friend, speaking to another loved one. Something else I really like is acupuncture, which you mentioned like through the EFT. But
Right.
sometimes like acupuncture can also just really help us just feel grounded and um, more here, which helps us process whatever difficulties we might be going through. Doesn't solve the problem, but it kind of like it helps us. I remember when I had like a really bad back situation where my back totally locked up, and I'm a big believer in Dr. Sarna's work, and I knew like it happened instantaneously, like nothing, there was no injury that happened. It happened in an instant, and I knew that it was coming from an emotional place. But the pain was so crazy that I couldn't deal with the emotional side of it because the pain was just so intense. And there was
Wow.
this like light bulb that went off in my head, which is like, Rena, stop being an idiot and go take an Advil.
Right.
Like you don't have to like go through this without medication just because you know that it's coming from an emotional place. So I took the Advil, and that enabled me to like start processing whatever emotional stuff I was going through. And so I think that's like what's important with all of these things. They're not gonna solve the problem, but they'll support you as you're going through whatever stressful event you're going through, whether it's like a daily stressful thing like your kids are making you crazy, or something bigger that happened.
Right. And a lot of times it won't fix the problem, but I do feel like getting like really quiet helps you hear like your intuition, and like sometimes it really does give you like that insight into what you needed, you know?
Yes.
Like eating definitely won't fix the problem.
Right.
It might make you feel better for a little bit, but like
Yeah.
sometimes like that like quieting down helps you like get in touch with yourself.
Totally.
Okay, yay, this is awesome.
Yay. Okay. Thanks, Gila.
Sure. Have a great week.
You too.